Hi friends, hope you're doing well. This is going to be a video about NATO. Will it survive? You see a lot of people talking about it, and you see a lot of people saying, there's really a question. So, can NATO survive the Trump era in America? Now, most people believe that it will, but not everybody. There's been a lot of talk that maybe potentially that America might get out of NATO, and how that's going to play out in Europe, and will there be a European army? Then becomes a lot of questions. Will there be a European army? Will the European Union stay together? How will that be impacted? Will members seek new alliances? Will we see a fracturing of the European Union and slash kind of like Brexit and slash a different form of maybe a European army, or maybe something different, maybe another one. Maybe we might see a 10-nation coalition come out like the Bible talks about, with the beast empire of the Antichrist that may come out of that, which may encompass more than just Europe, may include America, and who knows. So it clearly seems like President Trump is not enthusiastic about NATO, which makes sense when you actually look at it. NATO has a lot of drawbacks. It really seems to rely heavily upon the United States, and United States really, when you stop and look at it, can't really look to those other nations, Europe, to come to their defense if they really needed them. But the other way around would be that America would have to offer substantial military and manpower to any war that takes place in Europe, even with some of the very smaller nations that could pull America into a war that could be catastrophic, or very threatening to the existence of some European states, Europe itself, and potentially even America. And is that something that Americans and America wants? And is that something that Europe wants? I mean, in the case of like UK and France and Germany and this guy, do they want to get pulled in? And what we've seen is they really aren't committed, even to like what they call an existential threat to their existence in a lot of ways, how they behave with Ukraine. They're not really committed to that, and that's right there on the border of Europe. So, and I think Americans and America, for general, especially the Trump administration, is really looking at that and saying, is this something we really want to be involved in? Is there a benefit to it for us? And realistically, the amount of money you put into it, what's the payoff in return? And the consequences of getting involved in some European war that could be catastrophic, where we're obligated because of Article 5. Is that something we want to do? And I think Trump is looking at that seriously. And I think a lot of people are committed to it ideologically, because it's just been there for a long time, and they see it as an alliance that has served America and Europe very well, but at extreme cost, especially to America. And a lot of Europeans don't realize that, but they don't look at it from an unbiased point of view, let me put it that way. American taxpayers have really carried the load, so that a lot of the European states have pretty much gutted a lot of their, or really hollowed out a lot of their defenses and their defense capabilities, and in the process of offering a lot of social services to their people for political gain. It's easy to offer them something so somebody will vote for you. And you do that year after year after year after year, election cycle after election cycle, and you have to continue to make cuts elsewhere to pay for all those social benefits. And that has worked for many social groups and parties throughout Europe, but that is, seemingly, not continuing that way. And that's why you see more far right. They call it far right. I don't, but I guess if you're far left, everybody's far right, right? But some of those groups, like in Germany, you have a more conservative group that wins 20% of the electorate now. You have groups in the UK on the right, like Nigel Farage and those kind of people that are winning. Their thing just came out just that I saw, where UK has combat ready 20,000 troops roughly, ballparkish. That's it. 20,000 troops. You stop and think about it, it's not very much. That's what they have as combat ready. So if you had to be in a war right now, that's what they'd have to bring to the battle, which is almost nothing really when you start talking about a big land war where you really need some forces. You need them now. I mean, to put forces on hand, you need 20,000 troops. You know, you need more than that. You're going, you may need 200,000 troops from the UK. Are they prepared for that? Especially when they only have an army of about 75,000 troops, maybe 100,000 troops. And you got to remember, a lot of those are logistical troops or Navy troops and everything else, Air Force troops. They're not actually committed in the fight of being put into ground forces, especially you're talking about mechanized forces, things like that. And that's where I think Americans look at it and go, wait a minute, we're here to help you, but how are you going to help us if we're in a situation where we need you when you can't muster a force of more than 20,000 troops and you have almost no tanks? You have, really no battle groups that can really come to the aid, a significant aid if it's called upon and needed. We don't have a year or 2 years for you to train up troops, which is what it takes. Usually, the average time it takes to really train up troops in most disciplines is about 2 years, really, give or take. You can rush them through, but to really train up a troop, it takes about 2 years to really put them in something and them to become proficient at it, where they're going out and being able to, perform at a high level under a lot of duress, and then equip them properly as well. It takes time for you to build all that up and be able to supply them with the right group, food and equipment and tanks and planes and bullets and everything else. That takes a lot of time, and you have to have all that in place. And when Europe is saying, oh, they're going to do it, and you're looking at 5-10 years down the road for them to be able to do that. And so if you were to create a European army today, what's that going to look like, and would they be able to do that in any kind of rapid method or way? And it would be like, if you stop and think about it, it's like, well, you'd have to get, number one, you speak all different languages. You have different equipment being made from different countries. So you need to get all that consolidated together so that all the equipment is interchangeable. Because if you got a tank made in the UK, the equipment's not going to fit the tanks made in Germany and so forth. And you got the one in Sweden and the one in whatever. You start, and the equipment that's going on the planes for the French, Mirage or the Salt or whatever they call it, it's not going to fit the Saabs. I mean, it's just like you start going through all this stuff, it's not interchangeable. And then you have the language barrier on top of that. When you have French troops training with German troops, training with American troops, training with Norwegian troops, all these different languages, and everything's written in different languages. So you have to, consider all that. And that's extremely difficult to do so. So, there's a problem there. So will his survive? That's the real question. And in my take of it, what we expect to see is that if we are drawing in on the end times, if we are looking, and this is a prophecy update on that, one of those questions that we want to put out there, if we are living in towards the end of this age, which many things are pointing to that, and I certainly, and along with many other Christians, believe that we are certainly living in the end of this age, and there's a lot of reasons why, which I won't go into this video, which I've done in many other videos. You can look at it, but I'll give you a quick, just a quick synopsis of why I believe that we are in the last days, and you can examine it for yourself and come to your own conclusion. But one of those would be that there should be worldwide visual communications. Revelation 11, well, we have that because the whole world's going to see an event take place and celebrate over a 3-day period of time. Could have never happened, written 2,000 years ago, can happen now. And again, we start narrowly defining these things then at that point. And if everything falls within a narrow window of historical time, that gives you an indication that we're at that time, that period. when Jesus is talking about, when you see these events, lift up your head, for your redemption draws nigh. It's just not isolated to that one chapter of of Matthew or Luke or Mark. It's talking about the totality of the revelation he's given to us through his apostles as the Holy Spirit has moved them in the book of Revelation, Thessalonians, and so forth, and Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and other parts of the Bible, and the prophets of old. So you want to take the totality of Scripture and God's revelation as a whole when you look at end times study. Eschatology can, it's an in-depth look, you have to really look at all of it and not just one little snippet of it, and then bring that all together. And that's where, when you start looking at these, how do we know where we're at when we should expect to see certain things as we're commanded to do? Christ commands us to be looking and to be ready and to be alert. Well, how are you going to be looking and ready and alert if you don't know the things that you're to be looking for? And that's why it commands all of us as Christians to be reading God's word, to be looking at events that are happening, which in and of itself is kind of a prophecy, because years ago, if an event took place halfway around the world, you really wouldn't even know that it happened. Even something significant like the Black Death, for instance, in the Middle Ages, you probably wouldn't know that was even going on if you lived halfway across the world in, say, South America. There's a good chance you wouldn't even know that that's happening until it has already passed and over, and maybe didn't even know that it ever took place. And the same thing, a great earthquake that takes place in someplace in the Middle East, there's probably a pretty good chance, in the 1300s, you'd have never known that even happened. But today we know every time those events happen, we see events take place in rapid succession, and we are able to post it almost immediately. You see things where people post things on the internet that happen, and within seconds it's already uploaded into the World Wide Web, and people everywhere is viewing it automatically and talking about it, and it goes viral, and it's around the world, and everybody's talking about it. So completely has changed, and that's something we would expect to see. Again, worldwide communications, that's a big one. The ability to destroy the world by fire, also spoken of in the Bible. With that, before nuclear weapons, everybody was, it was basically, a lot of people could get killed. But before nuclear weapons, even World War II, you killed 22, 23, 25, 30 million people. But, you still, it's a drop in the bucket when you're talking about billions of people. As terrible and horrific as that is, nuclear weapons changes the whole dynamic now, because not only do you kill the people, you pollute the water, you pollute the soil, you pollute the plants, you make agricultural die, because you're disrupting it on a cellular level, destroy those plants, the radiation and everything else, and so you're talking about mass starvation, mass death on a level that we can't really contemplate. In this day that we live in right now, we're talking about billions of people dying. Just so happens the Bible talks about that, and talks about destruction of a big portion of the world by fire, and so forth. You stop and think about these things. Well, that's something that we have the ability to do now. Again, these things, you're starting to draw a picture of things I would expect to see. Israel being back in its land, the world being centrally focused on them, which is very strange when you think about a few 10, 12 million people, and the world just hyper fixated on them and on Jerusalem and the Temple Mount, and the fact that they're talking about a temple and these kind of things, to rebuilding it. Again, you start, if you make a checklist and you're going down the checklist, these are significant events. The gospel being preached around the world. Just go down the list of all these things that we should expect to see, and we're seeing it. Apostasy that would take place in the last days. I think we are seeing it with the ecumenicalist movement that's taking place right now, headed up in Rome. Which there's no argument. Even Catholics would agree with that statement. You see that happening. The last several popes have promoted that and do promote that. And Francis is one of them. He promotes that heavily. And you see a lot of Protestants that embrace that and accepted it and are preaching it and teaching it. A lot of false teachers and preachers, just like the Bible said would happen. So you start going on a list of all these things that we'd be looking for. And again, as you check these things off, do we see them? And the answer is yes, we do. And so that's why having an ideal of, wow, if that's the case, we should also see a rise ultimately of this final empire. And this final empire will be ultimately headed up by the Antichrist himself, one who's possessed by Satan and has enormous charisma and power and so forth, doing miraculous things that a lot of people are surprised about. But at the end of the day, he's ushering in destruction and mass death around the world. That's what's going to be coming on a peace platform, professing that he wants peace, professing that he's seeking peace and so forth, that he will even, guarantee a 7-year peace agreement, and in the midst of it break it though, and then war, literally all hell will break loose. in the last 3.5 years of that. But the first 3.5 years would be like a false peace that will take place. Oh, that's what those are things that we should expect to see. Is there a peace agreement we talked about in Israel? Yes. There's a lot of things that are happening in movement of pieces right now that makes you think. Well, one of those is that there should be ultimately ushering in this 10-nation coalition that will be the empire that the Antichrist will use to control the world, but he will control it through economic means, according to Revelation 13, where this mark of the beast system will be in place. Are we seeing instability around the world economically? Yes. Are we seeing where there's a means to implement a digital currency? Yes, and there's so many that are actually talking about central bank digital currencies now. And is there a means to implement that technologically in a digital form? Yes, and most people have a cell phone now that would help communicate that, facilitate that. And is there any kind of implantation device that would be able to communicate with that? Yes, the technology is already there where they are implanting chips into people's hands. And the Bible says that predicted that 2,000 years ago in their hand or their forehead. This will happen. This is something that the Bible talks about. Could it be implemented very rapidly and quickly? Yes. The technology is there now for that to happen. And people will be given a certain amount of time to get this marked to be part of the system. And if you don't get it, you won't be able to buy, sell, or trade. That's what the Bible talks about in Revelation. Could that be implemented? Is the technology there for that to happen? If anybody's being honest, the answer is yes, it could be. It could be implemented very quickly and very rapidly. And if you throw in AI and you throw in these mass plants that they're building for chips and so forth, and Trump just announced, $500 billion for AI development, and then you look around the world at what's happening, that fits. It really does. So you have the peace agreement, you have Israel back in its land, you have worldwide communications, ability to destroy the world by fire, you have, the disenchantment through NATO and the potentially emergence of something else that may come in its place, another 10-nation coalition that will usher in some kind of a new economic system as well. And the dollar is on the brink with $36 trillion in debt in America, people fearful of the dollar's collapse. What would take its place? A new economic marking system, and the fear that people would have economically would open the door for, I think, some kind of implementation of this mark of the beast system. So the Bible talks about that again in Revelation 13. I won't read it to kind of go over it because I've read it before in other videos, but if you want to take a look at it, you can. But one of the things it does talk about is this beast. It does that in a number of places. Daniel talks about this final beast empire. Revelation 17 is where it talks about this beast empire as well. So we just kind of expect to see these things. So if you get a chance, you can actually read through those. So basically Daniel chapter 7 through 9 will be a good one for you to read. And then Revelation 17 as well, where it talks about this harlot that rides this beast, but the beast is the empire. Harlot's on another video, but harlot in essence is this globalist ecumenical world religion that's headed up in Rome, and it's very clear on that, especially in the last verse of 17. It confirms that city, which is none other than Rome. There's no one else that fits that, and the descriptions as well about the cities, and it's a city that's situated on seven hills and so forth. So you can kind of get a feel for who it's talking about simply from that, and it's none other than Rome, and it is Rome that is, everybody would look at that as the spiritual. If you were going to pick one city that is the spiritual head of the world, I mean, some people might say Mecca if they're Muslim, but by and large, almost everybody would acknowledge Rome as the place, and because of its power, influence, prestige, economic prowess, and everything else, and then and the papacy and everything else that goes along with it, and the recognition around the world, from ambassadors and so forth that represent the various nations and empires of the world, or empire of the world, that basically go to Rome. And it is a monarchy as well. You have to remember that. So it fits. Do we see this city that's heading up an ecumenicalist movement around the world? And the answer is yes, we see that. Again, that narrow window of time, lots of events that are taking place that exactly fit uh, exactly what the Bible talks about. Well, if that's the case, then what we should expect to see is a final beast empire that's going to arise, and that final beast empire will ultimately um, cause all the nations to come down to a place called the Valley of Judgment, or Armageddon. And that's where you will see this final one will actually convince them to take their stand against Jesus Christ himself, which is alluded to and talked about in actually Revelation 17. But in any case, I won't read these, but you get a chance, you can take a look at those for time. I do want to play a short video, and I'll post the actual video itself, so you link so you can actually look at it. But this one here has Sky News is talking about it, and just a brief excerpt so you can kind of listen to what he's saying, and then you can get a feel that what I'm saying is absolutely true, that there's a real fear that NATO may collapse without America's support. And when you look around Europe, it would be very hard pressed to develop any kind of quick way a European army, but you could see a coalition of nations formed. And I think America might be the one behind that, because I do believe that I think America will be, if not the head, one of the chief states of that final beast empire, and for a number of reasons. But it seems to fit, in my opinion. And I think the Antichrist may even come out of the United States, if not out of Europe, but certainly out of the United States. So anyway, let's do it.
The NATO alliance has guaranteed European security for almost 80 years, since 1949. And essential to all that has been America's support. Now, for the first time, that is in some doubt. NATO may have expanded, numbering 32 members now, including Sweden and Finland. But the US is still by far its most important member. America has more than 100,000 military personnel deployed in Europe, has air bases, intelligence bases, and naval assets all stationed here. Donald Trump has been pointing out for years that America spends vast amounts more on defence than any other NATO nation. As you can see here, more than all the other NATO nations put together, with the UK now falling behind Germany into third place. But when viewed as a fraction of GDP defence spending, it looks a bit different. Poland is in the lead, then Estonia, and then America, a flatter line. Now, NATO is thinking of raising its guidelines for defence spending from 2% to 3%. Now, that still leaves it well short of what Russia is spending, almost 7% of its GDP, so Putin can fight his war in Ukraine. US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says Europe must do more to secure itself, and America has other things to focus on, causing concern about America's commitment to the alliance. But it's what he says about Ukraine that's caused the most alarm in the West, even if Russia is probably delighted.
All right, so kind of gives you an idea. I mean, that's just one of numerous people's take on what's happening with NATO, and the reality that I think, does America want to continue this? And I don't think Trump can just come right out and say, hey, I want to get out of this alliance, because it doesn't really benefit America. It really benefits Europe. And if America needed Europe's help, how much of help would they be able to supply us, at least in the foreseeable future? And the answer really is kind of limited. And there's a lot of drawbacks. It really puts you in a tough place if you're suddenly called on to go and fight to support Estonia, for instance. Nothing against Estonians, but it's a relatively, or Latvia, or, or Greece, or whatever. You could get pulled into a war, even a multi-front war could happen. I mean, just, not to mention other events around the planet that they're dealing with, mostly in the East with China and so forth. So it becomes more difficult to justify spending hundreds of billions of dollars on European defense, especially when you start looking at, like Trump's case, that what he makes is when you're running a $300 billion deficit with Europe because of their trade policies, and they've been doing it for a long time. And as he sees it, they've been taking advantage of America, but because of dumb politicians in America. But in any case, that's how he looks at it, and he's not at all wrong. If you're paying off somebody's defense and you're also getting taken advantage of on the trading side, well, you're getting it from both ends at that point. You're giving and you're getting it taken from you. So it's it's not a good thing, for sure. You're in essence being played. And I think that's how he sees it. And certainly the American taxpayer are definitely, they're taxed to the hilt. They and a lot of people are struggling, So and I think he realizes that, and he's playing on that to acquire his position of high approval ratings, and everything else is coming from that because a lot of Americans have felt like they've been abandoned, especially the middle class, by the political class and the elites, so-called elites, in throughout America and Europe in general. And they're not at all wrong in a lot of ways. I mean, the American middle class has been completely decimated primarily because of a lot of things, but one of those is, you know, they've been paying for the national defense in essence of Europe for 70 or 80 years, almost 80 years, and the rebuilding of those countries, and then also being in essence taken advantage of on a trade level as well, in the form of hundreds of billions of dollars. It doesn't include the so-called penalties that European unions have been throwing out at American companies into billions, which cost American jobs sometimes. Those companies sometimes lay off people so they can pay those hefty billion-dollar fines to help balance those budgets in Europe. They've been using their laws to do that, which not a pleasant thing to do. And as Americans are wising up to some of this stuff and getting it's coming across in the form of how they vote. They vote for people that, are going to look out for them. And Trump is that. He's an epitome of that. He's basically saying, I'm going to look out for you and I'm putting America first. Well, that appeals to a lot of people who feel like they've been abandoned and not taken care of for the sake of other people, and those coming in illegally, and also those who are overseas where you're supporting those other nations. And they're not all wrong. I mean, that's for sure. So, but at what cost? And at the end of the day, I think if we're looking at this not just from a political point of view, but more importantly from a prophetic, biblical point of view, a Christian point of view, is number one is that if this is the case, this is what we should expect to see. We should expect to see some form of a breakup of NATO, most likely, or NATO being, in essence, co-opted into this type of final beast empire that will arise, that the Bible talks about. It seems to suggest that, in my opinion, that it will wind up being either assimilated into it, or it will ultimately be a 10-nation coalition or 10-region coalition. I have a tendency to lean more towards nations myself because that's what it seems to suggest. But it could be 10 regions. I'm certainly not against that, for sure. Some people lean in that direction, but I seem to think that it's 10 powerful nations that come together like-minded, that form this new coalition of power throughout the world that will be both, most importantly, economic power, and secondly, military power. And I think America will be that primary military power, but it'll be one in which I think the American leader at that time feels like can serve the interests of America and not just America serving the interest of others. And I think that's something that kind of fits Trump. So is Trump the Antichrist? I don't know. How that will play out, time will tell. He has come in on a peace platform. He is talking about bringing in a peace agreement with Israel and the nations. There's a lot of things there for sure. But is he the Antichrist? I don't know. But certainly someone in his realm, we certainly need to be aware of that. I still think the Kushner could fall into that realm, but we don't, again, things are still young, we're still wait and see. I don't know. But clearly things are moving in directions that seem to narrowly define, again, that window of time, which means the rapture of the church can be very imminent. And also, if we are stepping into the 7 years of tribulation, you have to remember that it's important, imperative for us as Christians to warn those that we love and those that we know, because that's not going to be a playtime. It's over half the world's population will be dead within 7 years because of the destruction that will take place between the judgments and the war. You're talking about well over, depending on how you read it, I read it so about 2/3 of mankind. So you're talking about a mass amount of death in a short period of time. So that's how important it is for us to get the message out about Christ and serving Him and believing in Him. So, anyway, just something I want to put out there. God bless you. Be safe. Keep looking up. And we'll see you next time.